Well, Jens Stoltenberg is due to hold a press conference in just a few minutes, and we'll bring that to you live. First, though, we can join our Brussels bureau chief, Alexandra Norman, who's in Vilnius at the summit. Let's see if we can see her. There we are. Welcome, Alexandra. So what are we expecting to hear from Mr. Stoltenberg?
Well, we expect him, of course, to walk us through the decisions that NATO allies made today, and Ukraine is front and center of the agenda, and he is presumably going to speak about the fact that NATO is ready to ramp up its military support for Ukraine, and of course he will also speak about the question whether NATO allies are willing to give Ukraine any sort of a path to membership. And there are also other topics on the agenda, topics such as whether they have agreed to increase defense spending, whether they were able to agree on new defense plans. All of that is on the agenda, and we expect Jens Stoltenberg to begin his press conference shortly here in Vilnius.
OK, and earlier today, we had this angry tweet from Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky castigating his hosts. Just explain to us what his problem is.
Well, I think his problem is that he assumes, and probably rightly so, that Ukraine is not going to get what they would like to see, a clear path to NATO membership, maybe even a timeline. And we ask our sources here what they would respond to the tweet of the Ukrainian president, whether they feel how angry he is. But they were telling us, OK, that this is one thing what Ukraine would like to see, and the other thing is what NATO allies are willing to offer. And of course, all of them need to be on the same page. And what we are hearing is that they would probably set out conditions and will say that Ukraine can only be invited to become a member when conditions are met for that.
So how much unity or indeed division is there then behind the scenes over this issue?
Well, in the end, if we are going to see a joint statement, and that is what we are expecting, of course, all allies need to agree, all allies need to sign off on such a statement. But behind closed doors, there are, of course, exchanging arguments. This has been going on for months now with some NATO countries, such as Poland, for instance, or the Baltic states, Lithuania, for instance. They were saying we need to offer Ukraine a clear membership, a clear roadmap to membership. It's important. It would be also an important message to the Kremlin. Other NATO countries, such as the US, for example, or Germany, they have been taking a more cautious stance, saying that we don't know how this war is going to end, and we cannot say now Ukraine will become a member of the alliance once the war is over. If the war is over and when it is over, we will still need to see whether Ukraine is meeting the requirements that are needed for a membership in the alliance.
Excuse me. Some good news for NATO and for Sweden is that Turkey appears to have removed their objection to approving Sweden's NATO membership. What changed Mr. Erdogan's mind?
Well, according to Turkish officials, President Erdogan got what he wanted. They are celebrating him as a skilled negotiator here. Mr. Erdogan wanted Sweden to do more, to be tougher on activist Kurdish activists that Turkey considers terrorists, and Sweden has promised to work closely with Turkey together on counter-terrorism. Mr. Erdogan also wanted the EU to once again reinvigorate its relationship with Turkey, and we heard from many allies who are at the same time also members of the European Union that they want to back this motion, that they want to support Turkey to deepen its relationship with the European Union. That doesn't mean that accession talks with the EU that are not being on ice, that they are going to be resumed anytime soon. But apparently, this kind of support and reassurance that we heard from many allies, that was enough for the Turkish president to drop his objections to Sweden's NATO membership.
OK, so if this goes through then, if Turkey does ratify it and Hungary also ratifies it, do we expect Sweden to just be nodded through as Finland was?
Yes, totally. If we have a date for the Turkish parliament to ratify Sweden's membership, and if Hungary is ready to do it as well, then Sweden will be very soon, depending on Turkey and Hungary, of course, and on the proceedings there, Sweden will be a member of the alliance.
OK. Related, but slightly separately, another big topic at this summit is that NATO's plan to strengthen its eastern flank. What's on the table?
Well, on the table are three defense plans, three regional defense plans for the northern part of the alliance, for the central part of the alliance, and for the southern part of the alliance. And those plans set out what NATO is willing and ready to do to protect NATO territory. And of course, we are speaking here first and foremost about strengthening the eastern flank. NATO has been working on those plans since 2014, since the annexation of Russia, and last year in Madrid, NATO leaders once again decided to speed up that process, and today we expect NATO leaders to agree on those plans, and that means that we are going to see more ships, planes, fighter jets, and more forces on NATO's eastern flank. NATO wants to have 300,000 soldiers on high alert, ready to be deployed within 30 days. However, they are also saying they are not there yet. This number is aspirational, and that is something that, of course, is also going to be discussed here, as well as a new pledge on defense spending.
OK, thanks for that, Alexandra. Alexandra Norman at the NATO summit in Vilnius. We're expecting to hear from Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg in the next few minutes, and as soon as that happens, we will bring that to you live, and dare say Alexandra will return as well. For now, though, we'll move on and see what else is going on in the world. And more than 10,000 Ukrainians are believed to have lost an arm or a leg since the start of the Russian invasion. For soldiers, this usually puts an end to their time on the front line. There are, however, exceptions. 20-year-old Yehor Olnik decided to return to the front line after losing his leg in an explosion. Max Zander and Olga Golgovina have been following his story from eastern Ukraine to Norway, where he was undergoing rehabilitation.
We're a long way from the battlefields of Ukraine. Soldiers Yehor and Dmitro each lost a leg in the war. They're here for rehabilitation, and it's nearly time to leave.
I really wanted to see the Norwegian landscape. It's taken years of me. Emotionally, I feel more lively. But it will all return to normal when I'm home. Now I'm feeling pulled back to my parents, the service. I want to go home already.
Back in May, we met Yehor in eastern Ukraine.
It must have been a petrol mine. The cluster scattered and I stepped, fell. I didn't understand why. I looked at my leg, but it was gone. Everything was open. The heel was on one side.
Part of his leg had to be removed. He spent 7 months in hospital. Ihor got a prosthesis that let him walk again. And then, against medical advice and the wishes of his family, he returned to the fight. Here in Norway, specialists thought they could help him even more. Ihor now has a more advanced prosthetic leg.
The foot bends more with this prosthesis. I can. There is more cushioning here and no blow to the bone. It's all great.
This clinic's director and other staff decided to bring the men here for treatment. The director used to be a soldier himself.
What's happening in Ukraine? It's a struggle against civilizations. It's a fight, and these guys are in the front line, literally. So, what happens to them when they go back? How will their lives be? How are their families? Of course, you think more about that than the average patient. In peaceful, nice Norway.
Most patients here are elderly and civilians. Therapists drew up a special program for the soldiers with intense sessions in the gym, lifting, carrying, and coordination. At the end of their 5-week stay here, Dmytro will go home. He'll officially leave the army and will have to find a job. Ihor is intent on rejoining the fight for Ukraine. Dr. Irena Zolberg left Ukraine 30 years ago. Here she's been looking after Dmytro and Ihor. They formed a special relationship.
It's like being with my parents. You can't do this or that. It's like being home, like a family.
Preparing to send them back to war is hard.
It's difficult to not cry. I know that the boys are going back to a country where there's war, and we still don't know how this war will end. It's very difficult. I have no words.
They'll be returning home soon. Dmytro to his hometown, Ihor to his old unit. He never considered applying for asylum to live in peace here. The war has made him determined to carry on fighting, with or without a leg.
Watching DW News live from Berlin. Special extended coverage as we wait to hear from the NATO Secretary General at the summit in Vilnius. No sign of him yet, so we'll bring you some sport. And we'll start with tennis. Two youngsters at Wimbledon have set up a quarter-final clash that previews the future of men's tennis and will put their friendship to the test. Carlos Alcaraz and Holger Rune have grown up in the game together and will soon face off at the historic tournament.
Carlos Alcaraz may be top of the men's world rankings, but he has yet to reach the pinnacle of tennis, a Wimbledon title. The young Spaniard faced a formidable opponent in Matteo Berrettini, who reached the final in 2021 but has since dropped to 38th in the rankings. His old form returned early in this match as he won the opening set 6-3, but Alcaraz found his feet after that shock, while his opponent lost his footing after this rally, prompting a show of sportsmanship from his rival. After that, Alcaraz showed his ruthless streak, along with skillful ingenuity to turn the match around and win the next 3 sets 6-3. His win here sets up the first ever Wimbledon men's quarter-final between two players under the age of 21, as he will face his friend Holger Rune. We get along very well. We've shared the circuit a lot since we were 12 years old. We've grown together, we've shared great moments. At 20 years old, we're both fulfilling our dreams here. And I think for tennis, this is good too.
como he dicho en pista, yo creo que para el tenis es bonito también.
Meanwhile, Holger Rune earned his quarter-final spot with a gutsy win over Bulgaria's Grigor Dimitrov. Having lost the opening set and sealed the next two marginally by tiebreak, the Dane claimed the win in the fourth set, 6-3. Two 20-year-olds with plenty of history will now face off.
Back then he was callous, now he's callous. He's the same, just improved very a lot and very quickly. So I think I said it before. It's great to see that so many young players starting to do really good on the tour. And we played doubles one time in Pitidas. Hopefully we can do it again. But now first we're gonna battle against each other.
On Wednesday, friendship will become rivalry when these two mates meet.
South African runner Caster Semenya has won her appeal at the European Court of Human Rights. The three-time world champion and double Olympic champion over 800 metres was born with so-called differences of sexual development and isn't allowed to compete in events without taking testosterone-reducing drugs. The court has now ruled in her favour in a case involving testosterone levels in female athletes. Dozens of people have died in flooding as torrential rains sweep across northern India. Flash floods and landslides have destroyed highways and homes across several states in the north of the country and in Delhi. Authorities in the capital were forced to shut schools on Monday. Scientists say India's seasonal monsoon rains are getting heavier as the climate becomes warmer.
Heavier than normal monsoon rains turned the Bias River into a raging torrent in the North Indian state of Himachal Pradesh. The rushing water destroyed roads and damaged power lines and communication systems, which hampered rescue efforts.
Road restoration will take some
Road restoration will take some time, but our priority is to restore electricity and mobile networks so that we can receive information regarding any other stranded people, so we can rescue them.
Scientists say climate change is making the monsoon rains stronger and more unpredictable. Dozens of people have died because of the floods across northern India. Delhi was inundated with the highest rainfall in a single day for 40 years, swelling the Yamuna River, which runs through the heart of the capital. Local media reports say thousands of people are already being moved to shelters as the river reaches dangerous levels. Further southwest, staff at Jaipur's biggest hospital and medical college were left wading through the wards. The flood surge was so fast, they had no time to evacuate the patients.
Despite being such a big hospital, so much water has entered within just 3 to 4 hours of rain. So you can imagine the conditions in other hospitals. Patients are facing problems and they have not been moved yet.
As health workers try to pump out the water from the hospital rooms, India's weather agency is forecasting more rain in the days to come.
There's more on this from DW's Delhi Bureau Chief Amrita Chima on the banks of the Yamuna River.
I'm standing on the banks of the river Yamuna. The river has crossed the danger level mark here. As we came here, we saw hundreds and hundreds of people who were sitting here at low-lying areas, but they've now moved up to the roads and taken shelter there and under flyovers. Their lives are at risk should the river burst its banks. This has been a very severe monsoon, which has come early. The worst affected areas are in the Himalayan regions, the state of Himachal Pradesh and the neighbouring Uttarakhand. Rivers are flowing with ferocity, destroying everything in their paths. They are sweeping along houses, trucks, cars, livestock. The rivers flowing downstream have also affected the states of Punjab and Haryana. Large areas of farmland are underwater. The people are facing great inconvenience. They are stranded without electricity in their homes. Every time such a disaster takes place, there's a link made with climate change. The questions are being asked, but are the lessons being learned? As people wait to see how this disaster unfolds, there's great concern that this river should not burst its banks and destroy the lives of many in its path.
I'm Rita Chima reporting. Now to Latvia, which has wrapped up the latest edition of its Song and Dance Festival, one of the largest amateur choral and dancing events in the world. Tens of thousands of singers and dancers were on hand to delight the crowds in the capital, Riga. For some participants, the songs and dances were deeply personal. Yuri Rasheta reports.
These songs convey a sense of belonging, hope and belief. They convey a love for a free Latvia, a country located on the Baltic coast. Every 5 years, 40,000 amateur performers from all over Latvia gather to celebrate at an enormous song and dance festival. This year, Alina Igosheva and Arman Spriedols are taking part in the festivities. They just met each other for the first time here. Alina comes from Russia. She has Latvian ancestors. When she was younger, she sang in a Latvian choir in Moscow. She often went with her ensemble to Riga to perform. But now she lives here and teaches at a Russian school. 1/4 of Latvia's population speaks Russian. Alina says she is building bridges to help connect the two cultures.
Some of the children who are at the Latvian kindergarten now speak fluent Latvian. Others hardly ever used to speak it at home. Things are more difficult for them.
Dancing is as important to Armans as singing is to Alina. It's part of their identity. Armans is a farmer who grows sea buckthorn in western Latvia. 2 times a week he drives nearly 3 hours to rehearse with his dance ensemble.
When my sister and I were little, our parents brought us to Liepāja to take dance lessons. We drove 10 kilometers to take classes. Since then, dancing has become part of my weekly routine.
The Song and Dance Festival started 150 years ago. During 50 of those years, Latvia was part of the Soviet Union. Back then, some of their native songs were banned. But when the USSR fell apart, millions of people in the Baltic countries demonstrated peacefully for their new independence and sang folk songs as a sign of solidarity. It was dubbed the Singing Revolution.
We fought hard to regain freedom in Latvia. There are many songs about this. They are intertwined with my own life story. I cannot imagine who I would be without these songs.
That might explain why these amateur dancers and singers rehearse for years preparing for the festival. The rehearsals become much more intense the last few days before the show. Then there is hardly any time for anything else.
My family supports my hobby. My wife doesn't dance, but my children do. As their father, I'm happy they share my passion.
Performing on stage in front of 10,000 people is exhilarating. And when the week-long show is over, the performers celebrate together until dawn. They are making the most of it because they have to wait 5 years until they can meet up again.
Now to Iceland, where the meteorological officers urge people not to trek to the site of a new volcano that began to erupt on Monday. Lava and smoke began spewing out of a newly opened crevice in the ground after days of earthquakes. The volcano is only around 25 kilometres from Reykjavik, but experts say there's no danger to the Icelandic capital or its airport. It's the 3rd volcanic eruption in as many years in this area. Don't forget, you can always get DW News on the go. Just download our app from Google Play or from the App Store. That'll give you access to all the latest news from around the world, as well as push notifications for any breaking news. And if you're part of a news story, you can also use it to send us photos and videos of what's happening. World news at the top of the hour. We hope to bring you that press conference from Vilnius. Have a good day.
DW Stories. On TikTok, we unpack.
Every day the world crashes into us.
Higher taxes for the rich.
Women worldwide work for free.
Why does Pakistan have so many fake doctors?
And our timeline becomes overwhelming.
We can make the difference.
DW Stories.
The world unpacked.
Pops up
on your For You page.
The info, the inspo.
And all the input you need.
DW Stories, now on TikTok.
Hello guys, this is the 77%, the platform for Africa's youth to debate issues and share ideas.
You know, on this channel, we are not afraid to touch on delicate topics.
Africa's population is growing fast. And young people clearly have the solutions.
The future belongs to you.
The 77%, every weekend on DW.
Every woman, every man knows that a child needs food. Without food, can do nothing.
Before Mary's meals came, we had a lot of problems.
They drop out of the school because they were eating nothing when coming from home.
That could have easily been us. Any one of us.
This is DW News live from Berlin. NATO leaders assemble in Vilnius for a summit, and Ukraine's President Zelensky is expected to attend. The alliance's Secretary General says he's confident that allies will unite around a vision for Ukraine to become a member. After a year of negotiations, a path has opened up for Sweden to join the alliance. And Israelis launched nationwide protests as Israel's parliament advances a bill limiting the powers of the Supreme Court. The move has sparked widespread demonstrations in recent months across the country and has fueled a long-running political crisis. So straight to the NATO summit in Vilnius. Here's Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg.
Elements to bring Ukraine closer to NATO. First, a new multi-year assistance program for Ukraine to enable the transition from Soviet era to NATO standards, training and doctrines, to help rebuild Ukraine's security and defense sector, and to cover critical needs like fuel, demining equipment and medical supplies. Second, a new NATO-Ukraine Council, a forum for crisis consultations and decision-making, where we will meet as equals. And I look forward to having the inaugural meeting of the Council tomorrow with President Zelensky. Third, we reaffirmed that Ukraine will become a member of NATO and agreed to remove the requirement for a membership action plan. This would change Ukraine's membership path from a two-step process to a one-step process. We also made clear that we will issue an invitation for Ukraine to join NATO when allies agree and conditions are met. This is a strong package for Ukraine and a clear path towards its membership in NATO. Allies have also approved the most comprehensive defense plans since the end of the Cold War. These are designed to counter the two main threats we face, Russia and terrorism. Under our new plans, NATO aims to have 300,000 troops at high readiness, including substantial air and naval power. Robust deterrence and defense requires a robust industrial base. So leaders endorsed the new Defense Production Action Plan. This will accelerate joint procurement, boost interoperability, and generate investment and production capacity. To do all this, we need to invest more in defense. Our latest estimates show that defense expenditure by European allies and Canada will increase by 8.3% in 2023. This is the biggest increase in decades. Since 2014, they will have invested an extra $450 billion in defense. 11 allies now reach or exceed the 2% benchmark, and we expect this number will rise substantially next year. Today, allies made an enduring commitment to invest at least 2% of gross domestic product annually in defense, and to do more urgently to meet their commitments. NATO leaders also addressed China. China is not our adversary, and we should continue to engage. But Beijing's increasing assertiveness affects our security. China is increasingly challenging the rules-based international order, refusing to condemn Russia's war against Ukraine, threatening Taiwan, and carrying out substantial military buildup. China's nuclear modernization is unprecedented in speed and scale, and being carried out with no transparency. Allies agreed to continue working together to protect against China's coercive behavior. And tomorrow, we will meet the leaders of Australia, Japan, New Zealand, and South Korea, as well as the European Union, because we are stronger and safer when we stand together. And with that, I'm ready to take a few questions.
We'll start with Washington Post, there in the middle. Yeah.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. Michael Birnbaum from the Washington Post. President Zelensky, of course, issued a tweet in the middle of your talks that criticized the language that you've just agreed to on Ukraine's path toward membership. I was wondering what your thought was when you saw what he was saying about what NATO was agreeing to, and what your message would be for Ukrainians who are disappointed by this language. Thanks a lot.
What allies have agreed today is a strong, united and positive message to Ukraine about enduring support, but also a positive message on the path forward for membership. And this includes this package of practical support to enable full interoperability between Ukrainian armed forces and NATO forces, the establishment of the NATO-Ukraine Council, and then the decision to remove the requirement for a membership action plan, which actually means that instead of 2 steps to become a member, there will now be 1 step. We also made it clear that the invitation will be issued when conditions are met. Then I would like to add that on top of that, of course, allies are also providing substantial military support, because the most urgent task now is to ensure that Ukraine prevails, because unless Ukraine prevails, there is no membership issue to be discussed at all. And therefore I welcome the military support that the allies have provided now for months, actually starting back in 2014, and then since the full-fledged invasion in February last year, substantially stepping up their support. And just over the last few days, allies have made substantial new announcements. France has announced that they will deliver long-range cruise missiles. Germany just announced a new package with air defense and armored vehicles. And the US made yet another big announcement of more military support. And many other allies have made different types of support, including the establishment of coalition to provide training for F-16 fighter jets. So put together, this is a strong message which sends a positive and united message to Kiev.
We'll go to the Ukrainian news agency in the third row. Yeah.
Dmitry Shkurko, National News Agency of Ukraine here. Thank you for the floor. Question, just follow up my colleague. Can we expect today a final communique on Ukraine, and we can expect it tomorrow? And could you please specify what kind of conditions Ukraine still need to fulfill to initiate the accession procedure and to get an invitation? Thank you.
So we have agreed a communique, and we also agreed a package for Ukraine. That was agreed by the leaders, and I referred the main elements now. The practical support, the political ties with the NATO-Ukraine Council, full interoperability, the removal of the membership action plan, and then, of course, also all the different things that allies are providing bilaterally, including with the new announcements we have heard today and the last few days. I have been in close contact and regular contact, and NATO allies have also been in regular contacts with Ukrainian officials. I've discussed this also with President Zelensky, and I look forward to meet him tonight, and then also to have the inaugural meeting of the NATO Ukraine Council tomorrow, where I will set out the package of the three elements, bringing Ukraine closer to NATO, and this is a strong package.
Okay, Reuters. Over there. Andrew, maybe you can just ask your question.
Andrew Gray from Reuters, Secretary General. To come back to President Zelensky's remarks, he said it would be absurd if a time frame is not set neither for invitation nor for Ukraine's membership. How would you respond to that specific point, and why have allies not set out a time frame today?
What we have agreed is a very substantive package with many different elements that helps to move Ukraine closer to NATO, help them to move towards NATO membership, and this is partly a very practical support on, for instance, interoperability, and reforms, defense sector reforms and interoperability are among the conditions which are important for membership. So that's a practical way of moving them, moving Ukraine closer to NATO. Then we also send a strong political message with the language on membership, including the language which is now in the communique on invitation. So there's never been a stronger message from NATO at any time, both when it comes to the political message on the path forward for membership and the concrete support from NATO allies, military support, but also the practical support on how to ensure full interoperability. And if you look at other membership processes, there have not been time lines for those processes. They are conditions-based, has always been.
Okay, we'll go to the gentleman here in the second row.
Lauri Nurmi, Iltalehti from Finland, Mr. Secretary General. The Baltic Sea becomes NATO's inland sea. NATO puts 300,000 new troops on high readiness. What does all this mean for frontline countries like Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania and Poland? And what is NATO's message to Mr. Putin and Russia. How historic is this moment? Thank you.
It is historic that both Finland and Sweden will become members of NATO. Finland is already a full member, and with the agreement that President Erdogan and Prime Minister Kristersson and I were able to make last night, Sweden has also become a full member of the alliance. This is historic. It's important for the whole alliance. It's important for Finland. It's important for Sweden. But it is also in particular important for the Baltic region, because when you look at the map, you realize that, for instance, the ability to reinforce the Baltic region is very much improved by the fact that we now have Finland and soon also Sweden as full members. And that will be reflected in our defense plans, in our exercises, in our capability targets and everything else we do as an alliance. So it makes the whole alliance stronger, and it makes especially the Baltic region safer. It sends the message that NATO's door is open. It sends the message that it's for NATO allies to decide on enlargement. It's not for Moscow to deny sovereign nations the sovereign right to choose their own path. And this is, again, something we have demonstrated not only in words, but also in deeds, by now allowing 2 new members and sending a message to Ukraine, which is stronger than any message NATO has ever sent before on membership for Ukraine.
We have the gentleman over there in the 3rd row. Over there.
European Pravda, Ukraine. Secretary General, I would ask you to clarify a bit on conditions. I understand that you cannot list all of them. It's probably not clear, but maybe you see how these conditions would be defined, agreed, because I'm afraid that it would be read that NATO has lifted membership action plan, but have invented another membership action plan with another name, which is conditions. So it's like making a bit of fake achievement. Thank you.
No, what we say in the communique is that Ukraine has moved beyond the requirement for a membership action plan, just because Ukraine has come much closer to NATO. I was actually attending the NATO summit in Bucharest in 2008 as a Norwegian Prime Minister, and I remember very well the discussion there. And of course the discussion now is totally different for many reasons, not least because Ukraine is under full-fledged attack by Russia, but also because Ukraine has come so much closer to this alliance over all these years, because especially since 2014, when NATO allies start to train and equip Ukrainian armed forces, but even more so after February last year, Ukraine has demonstrated capabilities, skills, and has been more and more integrated with NATO. This is also a consequence of the equipment which NATO allies are delivering, because, for instance, when we deliver modern battle tanks or advanced air defense systems, a consequence of that is also more interoperability, more NATO standards, doctrines, and a gradual movement from the Soviet era doctrines, standards and equipment to NATO, just by the fact that so much equipment is now delivered. And of course, when we start training with training of pilots for F-16s, it will even more add to this important interoperability, which has always been a requirement for NATO membership. So this is moving Ukraine closer to NATO and to NATO membership, and also reflecting the fact that NATO has come much closer. Well, we have conditions partly in Article 10 of the Transatlantic Treaty, the Washington Treaty, and then, of course, at the end of the day, it has to be allies that assess whether conditions are fully met or not, and that's exactly what allies then have to agree, and therefore we also refer to both the conditions, but also the need for all allies to agree. That's the way we make decisions in NATO.
Politico. Politico here.
Thank you, Secretary General. Just to follow up on this important topic, I have in front of me the text from 2008 from Bucharest, which we've all been reading and rereading over the past weeks. NATO welcomes Ukraine's and Georgia's Euro-Atlantic aspirations for membership in NATO. We agreed today that these countries will become members of NATO. So if you were explaining just to the average citizen in the alliance and in Ukraine, people who are really keen to understand what was decided today, how would you explain the difference between the text that was agreed in Bucharest in 2008 and the specific language that was agreed today?
There are several differences. One important difference is that I think the next sentence, or at least a bit further down, we say that the next step is membership action plan. And that's exactly what we removed today. And at every summit since 2008, we have said Ukraine will become a member. The next step is membership action plan. Now we remove that. So that's actually turning this process, which has always been 2 steps, into 1 step. That actually moves Ukraine closer to membership, and it's a significant difference from the 2008 language, which has been reiterated at every summit since 2008. And it has been also a process in NATO to make that decision, because it was not was a straightforward decision to make. I'm glad that allies agreed, and it was the main element in my package I launched in Oslo in May at the informal meeting. Then it was, what should I say, there were questions asked whether that was to move too fast. And therefore, I'm glad that since May, since we started this discussion of removing a map requirement, all allies today have agreed to remove a map requirement. So that's difference number 1. Difference number 2 is that we actually now have a program for how to help and support Ukraine move closer to NATO. And that is the interoperability, the multi-year program, but also the strengthening of our political ties, and also reference to that the foreign minister will also in the text we agreed today, will regularly assess progress. So this, together with the fact that the substantial delivery of equipment and training just by itself moves Ukraine closer to membership, is a big difference. There is one more difference, and that is that in 2008, Ukraine was quite far from NATO. What has happened since 2008 has already moved them much closer to us.
Swedish radio.
Okay, so that was the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg addressing the press after his during his press conference. This is on the day 1 of the 2-day NATO summit in Vilnius. Watching that with us was our Brussels bureau chief, Alexandra Norman. Welcome, Alexandra. Let's start with the main points of what you've heard.
Well, the main point is, of course, that now we know what NATO allies are willing to offer to Ukraine. In the statement, they are saying that they will extend an invitation to Ukraine to become a member of the alliance when allies agree and conditions are met. So this is a quite vague statement. They are not saying that Ukraine will become a member once the war is over. They are not setting a timeline here, and I think that this is going to be quite disappointing for the Ukrainian government that was hoping to have a timeline or a clear membership perspective, but that is not what allies were able to agree on today.
And it wasn't very clear, was it? The Secretary General was asked time and time again, and I was glad he was asked, because I was listening and thinking, he sort of alluded to it, but hasn't quite. And then I thought, OK, the other reporters keep asking him, so it's not just me. It doesn't appear, there doesn't appear to be a clear path to Ukraine. If you do this, if you do this, if you do this, then you're a member. That was not clear, even though he was pressed on this.
He was pressed on that indeed, with reporters in the room trying to find out and asking him how this new statement is different from what the alliance promised Ukraine during their Bucharest summit in 2008, when they already said that they want, or that they promise, Ukraine will be a member of the alliance, but they stopped short of telling when and how. So Stoltenberg was pressed to explain how this statement today is different and whether allies today are offering more to Ukraine. And I would say that even though he tried to explain it, it is really difficult to understand where is the difference, because this new statement is also very vague, and allies still could decide not to allow Ukraine to become a member.
So his three main points seem to be that they're helping Ukraine to achieve full interoperability with NATO forces. He said that, and they've removed the need for an action plan, and they've instituted this NATO-Ukraine Council. What is that expected to do?
Well, this new NATO-Ukraine Council is expected to upgrade Ukraine's status with the alliance. They will be then able, and the first meeting is going to take place tomorrow, they will be sitting at the table with all allies. They can raise any issue they would like to speak about. They will get access to more areas of cooperation, to more intelligence sharing, which is important. But of course, it sounds a bit like a bureaucratic move, and I don't think that Ukraine is very happy about that. Stoltenberg also went on saying that, look, what we want to do right now is to provide Ukraine with practical help, with equipment, with training, with money, and all of that is also being approved here in Vilnius, and individual allies have already announced, like France, for instance, that they are going to deliver new weapons to Ukraine. But of course, what was important for Kiev is to have like a sort of roadmap to membership, and that is what not happened here today.
OK, thanks for that, Alexandra. Alexandra Norman in Vilnius at the NATO summit. Let's go from there to the Ukrainian capital, Kiev, where we find our correspondent, Nick Connolly. Welcome, Nick. You were listening into Jens Stoltenberg's speech. What's your main takeaway there from the Ukrainian perspective?
Well, there's a real struggle to try and wrestle some positives from that. He said, Stoltenberg said that the membership action plan was gone, but that there would now be conditions. You maybe heard a Ukrainian journalist asking what's the difference between unnamed conditions and a membership action plan. The only thing he seemed to reply was basically that with a membership action plan, at least there was some kind of clear defined conditions, and this basically would just be down to individual member states to agree or not to Ukraine joining. So this is definitely pretty far below any of the expectations that you had if you were listening to Ukrainian politicians, especially people close to President Zelensky going into this. And there's a real sense here in Ukraine that basically the naysayers, the countries that were most concerned about this, have won out, and that this is basically kind of the smallest common denominator.
Right, so this has been under discussion since 2008. How are people... I mean, is NATO membership a big issue there? Will this latest announcement, is this going to disappoint people, or will they just be getting on with their lives?
I think before the 22nd of February of last year, NATO was pretty abstract. It was something that was talked of, but didn't seem to be as important as joining the EU, having that right to work and study across the continent. But I think Russia's full-scale invasion has made clear to Ukrainians that just being the kind of grey zone between an aggressive, kind of expansive Russia and the West is not a very good place to be in. That even if Ukraine maybe had prepared better for this war, it's still just 4 times smaller by population and in resources, much more so than its bigger neighbour to the north. And lots of people who previously maybe were on the fence are now pretty outspoken in saying that Ukraine is the only way to guarantee security for this country in the future. And that without it, even if Ukraine wins this war now, it's going to be basically left kind of hanging, and lots of people might choose to leave if they don't see a kind of perspective of a safe future here.
All right, thanks for that, Nick. Nick Connolly in Kyiv. Closing headline then, NATO Chief Jens Stoltenberg has signalled support for Ukrainian membership in the alliance, saying that an invitation would be issued when conditions are met. He was responding to criticism from the country's president, who said earlier that it was absurd that his country hadn't been given a concrete timeline. More at the top of the hour. Have a good day.